Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Before we dive into today's incredibly important topic, I want to ask you for a quick favor. If you find value in this video, please hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm share this content with more people who need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our content. Also, drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your engagement means the world to us. And if you really want to support the channel and help us create more valuable content like this, consider leaving a super thanks. Your support allows us to continue bringing you the insights and advice you need to navigate modern relationships successfully. Now, let's get into something we need to talk about. Something real. Something that many men experience but few discuss openly. Picture this scenario. You're a man in your 30s, 40s, or maybe even 50s. You've been through relationships. You've learned lessons. You've grown. And now you find yourself attracted to or in a relationship with an older woman. Maybe she's in her 50s, 60s, or beyond. There's wisdom in her eyes, experience in her presence, confidence in her stride. She knows who she is, or at least that's what it seems like. Dating an older woman can be incredible. The maturity, the life experience, and the emotional intelligence that often come with age. These can all contribute to a deeply fulfilling relationship. But here's what nobody wants to tell you. Age doesn't automatically equal wisdom. Experience doesn't always mean emotional health. And sometimes, the red flags that show up in relationships with older women are even more important to recognize because they're often more subtle, more manipulative, and more deeply ingrained in patterns that have been developing for decades. Today, we're going to explore 8 critical red flags you should never overlook when dating or in a relationship with an older woman. These aren't about age discrimination. They're not about saying older women are problematic. This is about recognizing specific behavioral patterns that can be toxic, manipulative, or harmful to your well-being, regardless of who displays them. The difference is that with older women, these patterns often come wrapped in sophistication, experience, and a kind of confidence that can make you doubt your own instincts. So whether you're currently in a relationship with an older woman, considering one, or just want to be informed, stay with me. What I'm about to share could save you from years of emotional turmoil, financial manipulation, or psychological damage. These insights come from relationship psychologists, real experiences from men who've been there, and patterns that emerge time and time again in problematic relationships. Let's dive deep into these red flags, understand why they matter, and learn how to protect yourself while still remaining open to healthy, fulfilling relationships with older women who genuinely have their lives together and can be amazing partners. Red flag number 1. The life experience weapon. The first red flag we need to discuss is what I call the life experience weapon. This is when an older woman consistently uses her age and experience as a tool to dismiss, invalidate, or belittle your feelings, opinions, or concerns. Now, let me be clear. Having more life experience is valuable. It's one of the attractive qualities about dating someone older. But there's a massive difference between sharing wisdom and wielding experience as a weapon to shut down communication or maintain control in the relationship. Here's how this red flag typically manifests. You bring up a concern, an idea, or a feeling. Maybe you're uncomfortable with something in the relationship. Maybe you have a suggestion for how to handle a situation. Maybe you're expressing a legitimate emotion about something that happened, and instead of engaging with what you're actually saying, she responds with some variation of this. When you've lived as long as I have, you'll understand. I've been through this before. Trust me, you're overreacting. You're still young. You don't get how the world really works. I've seen this 1,000 times and you're wrong. Do you see what's happening here? Your actual concern, feeling, or perspective is being completely bypassed. Instead of addressing the substance of what you're saying, she's pulling rank based on age. She's creating a hierarchy where her perspective is automatically more valid than yours, not because of the merit of her argument, but simply because she's older. This is manipulation disguised as wisdom. It's a power play that shuts down equal partnership and creates a dynamic where you're always in the position of the student and she's always the teacher. But relationships aren't classrooms. They're partnerships between equals who bring different but equally valuable perspectives to the table. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you're in a relationship. and you notice that she frequently makes plans without consulting you. You bring this up. You say something like, "I feel like we should discuss major plans together before committing to them. It makes me feel valued and included in the relationship." A healthy response would acknowledge your feelings and open a dialogue about communication patterns in your relationship. But if she has this red flag, here's what you might hear instead. "Oh, sweetie, I've been making my own decisions for 30 years. I'm not going to start asking permission now. When you're my age, you'll understand that you can't wait around for everyone else's input on everything. I've learned that if you want something done, you just do it. You'll get there eventually." Notice how your actual concern, which was about mutual respect and partnership, has been completely reframed as you being controlling or needing to give permission. Your legitimate request for consultation in a partnership has been dismissed as immaturity, and the entire conversation has been redirected away from your actual needs. This pattern is particularly insidious because it makes you doubt yourself. You start thinking, maybe I am being immature, maybe I don't understand, maybe my feelings aren't as valid as I think they are. And that's exactly the point. This red flag is designed to keep you in a one-down position where your needs, feelings, and perspectives are always secondary to hers. The life experience weapon also shows up in more subtle ways. It might be constant corrections about how things should be done, always accompanied by references to her superior knowledge. It might be dismissive comments about your career choices, life decisions, or even your feelings, all framed as her just knowing better because she's been there and done that. Here's why this red flag is so dangerous. Over time, it erodes your self-confidence and your sense of self. You start to believe that your instincts are wrong, that your feelings are invalid, and that you need her guidance for everything. You become dependent on her approval and her wisdom, even when that wisdom is actually just a tool to maintain control over you. In a healthy relationship with an age gap, both partners respect each other's perspectives. Yes, the older partner might have insights from experience, but the younger partner also brings fresh perspectives, current knowledge, and valid feelings that deserve respect. Experience is shared as a gift, not wielded as a weapon. Concerns are addressed on their merits, not dismissed based on who has more birthdays under their belt. So how do you recognize if this is happening in your relationship? Ask yourself these questions. When you bring up concerns, does she actually address them, or does she redirect the conversation to be about your lack of experience? Do you feel like your opinions and feelings are given equal weight in the relationship, or are they constantly being overridden by her age-based authority? Do you find yourself second-guessing your own instincts and feelings because she's told you you're too young to understand? Has your confidence in your own judgment decreased since being in this relationship? If you're answering yes to these questions, you're dealing with the life experience weapon, and it's a serious red flag that needs to be addressed. Because no amount of life experience justifies dismissing, invalidating, or manipulating a partner. Age might bring wisdom, but it doesn't give anyone the right to make you feel small, inadequate, or perpetually wrong. Remember, wisdom shared respectfully enhances a relationship. Wisdom used as a weapon destroys it. Know the difference and don't let anyone, regardless of their age, make you feel like your voice doesn't matter in your own relationship. Red flag number 2. The financial manipulator. Red flag number 2 is one that can have serious, lasting consequences on your life, your future, and your financial security. This is what I call the financial manipulator pattern. And it's particularly common and particularly dangerous when it shows up in relationships with older women who have had more time to perfect these manipulative techniques. Let's start by acknowledging something important. In relationships with age gaps, there are often financial disparities. The older partner typically has had more time to build wealth, establish career stability, and accumulate assets. This isn't inherently a problem. In fact, in healthy relationships, partners support each other financially in various ways throughout different life stages. The issue isn't the financial disparity itself. The issue is when that disparity is used as a tool for control, manipulation, or exploitation. The financial manipulator red flag has several distinct manifestations, and I want to walk you through each of them so you can recognize them if they're happening in your relationship. First manifestation, the bailout pattern. This is when she consistently positions herself as your financial savior while simultaneously keeping you in situations where you need saving. Here's how it works. Early in the relationship, she might be incredibly generous. She pays for nice dinners. She covers the costs of trips. She might even help you out when you're in a tight spot financially. This generosity feels amazing. It feels like care and love, but then slowly a pattern emerges. She starts making comments about your financial situation. Not necessarily mean comments. Often they're framed as concern. She might say things like, "I worry about your financial stability. You know you can always come to me if you need help. I just want to make sure you're taken care of." On the surface, this sounds caring, but watch what happens next. She starts subtly or not so subtly influencing your financial decisions in ways that keep you dependent. She might discourage you from taking a job opportunity that would increase your independence, framing it as concern. She might encourage spending that keeps you in a position of needing her help. She might create situations where you feel obligated to accept her financial assistance and then use that assistance as leverage in the relationship. The key here is the pattern. She rescues you financially, but the rescue never leads to your increased independence. Instead, it reinforces a dynamic where she's the provider and you're the dependent. And over time, this dynamic gives her enormous power in the relationship. When you're financially dependent on someone, it becomes exponentially harder to leave, to set boundaries, or to assert your needs. She knows this. And if she has this red flag, she's cultivating this dynamic intentionally. Second manifestation, the investment demand. This is when she expects significant financial contributions from you, contributions that are disproportionate to your means or that benefit her far more than they benefit you or the relationship. This might look like pressure to invest in her business, her property, or her projects. It might be expectations that you contribute equally to a lifestyle that's built around her income level, not yours, leaving you stretched thin while she's comfortable. The manipulation here is often wrapped in relationship language. We're building a future together. If you really loved me, you'd invest in our dreams. This is about our partnership. But notice what's actually happening. Your financial resources are being directed toward her benefit, often at significant cost to you, while the return on that investment is vague, delayed, or non-existent. I've heard stories from men who've invested their savings into businesses that were always in their partner's name. Men who've contributed to mortgage payments on properties they had no legal claim to, men who financially supported lifestyles they couldn't afford, going into debt to maintain a relationship with someone who had far more resources than they did, but expected them to constantly prove their commitment through financial sacrifice. Third manifestation, the scorekeeper. This is perhaps the most emotionally damaging form of financial manipulation. This is when she keeps a running tab of everything she's paid for and everything she's done for you financially and brings it up strategically to win arguments, shut down your concerns or make you feel guilty for having needs or boundaries. You try to have a conversation about something that's bothering you in the relationship. Maybe it's about time together, communication, or emotional intimacy. And somehow the conversation gets redirected to money. She brings up the vacation she paid for 3 months ago, the dinner last week, the gift she bought you, the bill she covered. And suddenly, your legitimate emotional concern has been reframed as you being ungrateful for her financial generosity. This is weaponizing generosity. True generosity in a relationship doesn't come with strings attached. It doesn't get brought up as leverage. It doesn't get used to shut down communication or make you feel like you owe silence, compliance, or acceptance of bad behavior in exchange for financial support. The scorekeeper makes you feel like you can never bring up legitimate concerns because you're always in debt to her financially. Every kind thing she's done becomes a reason you should tolerate things that aren't okay. Every financial contribution becomes a shield she uses against your legitimate needs and feelings. Fourth manifestation, the secret keeper. This is when she's not transparent about her financial situation, even when it directly affects you or when you're being asked to make financial decisions together. She might be secretive about debts, about income, about spending, or about financial commitments. This secrecy might be justified as privacy or as none of your business, even in serious committed relationships where financial transparency is part of a healthy partnership. The danger here is that you can't make informed decisions about your own financial involvement if you don't have accurate information. You might be contributing to a household where she's actually in serious debt. You might be planning a future with someone whose financial situation is entirely different from what she's presented. You might be making sacrifices based on needs that don't actually exist. Now, here's what makes the financial manipulator red flag particularly dangerous with older women. They've had more time to accumulate wealth, yes, but they've also had more time to accumulate debt, to develop problematic financial patterns, and to learn how to present a financial picture that might not match reality. The sophistication and confidence that come with age can make financial manipulation much harder to detect. Let me be absolutely clear about something. Asking for financial transparency in a serious relationship is not gold digging. It's not being materialistic. It's basic due diligence. If you're sharing a life with someone, if you're making financial decisions together, if your financial well-being is intertwined with theirs, you have every right to understand the full picture. And if she responds to reasonable requests for transparency with accusations, defensiveness, or gaslighting, that's a red flag waving right in your face. So what do you do if you recognize this red flag? First, establish boundaries around financial discussions and decisions. No major financial commitments without full transparency and time to consider. Second, protect your own financial independence. No matter how much you love someone, maintain your own accounts, your own credit, and your own financial identity. Third, pay attention to patterns, not isolated incidents. One-time generosity is kindness. A pattern of financial rescue that keeps you dependent is manipulation. Fourth, never let financial contributions be used to shut down legitimate emotional concerns. Money and emotional health are separate issues in healthy relationships. And finally, trust your instincts. If something feels off about the financial dynamics in your relationship, it probably is. Don't let age-based authority or sophisticated presentation make you doubt your gut. Financial manipulation can take years to recover from. It can damage your credit, your savings, and your financial future. Recognize it early, address it clearly, and if it doesn't change, protect yourself by leaving. Red flag number 3. The past life shadow. Red flag number 3 is something I call the past life shadow, and it's one of the most emotionally exhausting red flags you can encounter in a relationship with an older woman. This is when her past, her previous relationships, her ex-partners, or her past life circumstances cast a constant shadow over your current relationship, affecting everything from daily interactions to major life decisions. Now, everyone has a past. By the time someone reaches their 50s, 60s, or beyond, they've lived a lot of life. They've had relationships. They've had marriages that maybe didn't work out. They've had children who are now adults. They've had careers, friendships, losses, and triumphs. This is all normal, expected, and not inherently problematic. Having a past is part of being human. Having a rich history is part of what makes older women interesting and attractive partners. The red flag isn't that she has a past. The red flag is when she hasn't processed that past, hasn't moved beyond it, and allows it to dominate your current relationship in ways that are unhealthy, unfair, or destructive. Let me break down the different ways this red flag manifests. First, there's the ex-partner obsession. This is when she talks constantly about her ex or exes. Every conversation somehow circles back to what he did, what he said, how he hurt her, or how you're different from him, or worse, how you're just like him. The ex becomes a third person in your relationship, even though he's not physically there. You might be having a nice dinner, and she brings up how her ex used to take her to this restaurant. You might be planning a vacation, and she mentions how her ex ruined the last time she tried to go somewhere similar. You might have a disagreement, and suddenly she's telling you that you sound just like her ex when you talk that way. Or conversely, she might constantly compare you favorably to her ex, which might seem nice at first, but actually means she's still mentally engaged with that past relationship rather than being present in this one. Here's the thing. Occasional references to past relationships are normal. Sharing stories and life experiences is part of getting to know someone. But when the past is constantly invading the present, when her ex is a regular topic of conversation, When you feel like you're either competing with a ghost or being measured against a standard set by someone who's no longer in her life, that's a problem. This pattern tells you several things. First, she hasn't emotionally moved on from that relationship. Whether it ended 2 years ago or 20 years ago, she's still processing it, still angry about it, still defined by it. Second, she's not fully present with you. Part of her attention, energy, and emotional investment is still back there in that past relationship. Third, she may be using you as a tool in her ongoing emotional processing of that past relationship, rather than valuing you as an individual separate from her history. The second manifestation of the past life shadow is what I call baggage dumping without boundaries. Everyone has emotional baggage. Again, that's not the issue. The issue is when that baggage is dumped on you without any awareness of boundaries, without appropriate timing, and without her doing her own work to process and heal from past traumas. This might look like trauma dumping in the early stages of the relationship. You're getting to know each other. Things are still new. And she's sharing deeply traumatic experiences in overwhelming detail without considering whether you're ready for that level of intimacy or whether the timing is appropriate. It's not that these experiences aren't valid or shouldn't be shared in a relationship. It's that healthy sharing happens gradually with mutual consent and with recognition that the listener also has emotional capacity that needs to be respected. Or it might look like using past traumas as an excuse for current bad behavior. She treats you poorly, and when you bring it up, she explains it away with reference to what she's been through. I've been hurt before, so I have trust issues. My ex cheated, so I need to check your phone. I was in an abusive relationship, so I need to control everything. Do you see the problem here? Past trauma is real and its effects are significant, but it's not a blank check to treat someone poorly. It's not an excuse to refuse growth, healing, or change. Healthy people who've experienced trauma take responsibility for their healing. They might say, I have trust issues because of my past, and I'm working on them in therapy. I might need your patience as I work through these feelings. They create a partnership in healing, rather than making their partner responsible for managing, fixing, or accepting their unhealed wounds. The third manifestation is the frozen time capsule. This is when she's still living as if it's the time period when she was in her prime, refusing to acknowledge or adapt to current realities. This might be about lifestyle expectations that haven't adjusted to current circumstances. It might be about relationship models that are stuck in patterns from decades ago. It might be about identity issues where she can't move beyond who she was 20 or 30 years ago to embrace who she is now. For example, she might have a lifestyle from when she was married to a wealthy partner. And even though that relationship is long over and her financial situation is different, she still expects that lifestyle and expects you to help provide it. Or she might have ideas about relationships and gender roles that were formed in the 1980s or 90s and hasn't updated those mental models despite massive cultural shifts. Or she might still identify primarily as someone's ex-wife or someone's mother, rather than as her own person with her own current identity. The fourth manifestation is the unresolved family drama shadow. By the time someone is older, family dynamics have usually become more complex. There are adult children, maybe grandchildren, ex-in-laws, and complicated family histories. In healthy situations, these are managed with boundaries and balance. But when this red flag is present, unresolved family drama constantly intrudes on your relationship. This might be adult children who are overly involved in her life, and by extension, your relationship. It might be expectations that you'll help solve family problems that existed long before you came along. It might be being pulled into conflicts and taking sides in family issues that have nothing to do with you. It might be that her role as a mother or grandmother so completely dominates her identity and schedule that there's no real space for your relationship to breathe and grow. Again, family is important. Having close relationships with adult children is healthy, but when family enmeshment is so strong that you feel like you're dating an entire family system rather than an individual, that's a problem. When unresolved family conflicts become your conflicts by default, that's a problem. When you can never make plans without checking with adult children first, that's a problem. Here's what makes the past life shadow particularly challenging. The older someone is, the more past there is to process. And if someone hasn't done the internal work to heal from past relationships, to establish identity beyond past roles, and to set boundaries around past trauma, all of that unprocessed history accumulates. You end up in a relationship with not just the woman in front of you, but with 20, 30, or 40 years of unprocessed emotional history. So how do you recognize if this is your situation? Ask yourself these questions. Do conversations regularly circle back to her past relationships, especially her ex-partners? Does she use past trauma as an excuse for present bad behavior without taking responsibility for her healing? Do you feel like you're constantly being compared to people from her past, either favorably or unfavorably? Does her identity seem stuck in a past version of herself rather than embracing who she is now? Are unresolved family dramas constantly intruding on your relationship? Do you feel like her past has more power in your relationship than your present together? If you're nodding along to several of these, you're dealing with the past life shadow. Here's what you need to understand. You cannot heal someone else's past. You cannot fix what previous relationships broke. You cannot make up for what she lost or what she went through. That's her work to do, ideally with professional help. What you can do is set boundaries. You can say, I understand your past is part of who you are, but I need our relationship to be about us, not about comparing me to your ex or competing with your history. You can say, I'm willing to support you as you heal, but I can't be your therapist or your emotional dumping ground without boundaries. You can say, I respect your family, but I need us to have a relationship that exists independently, with our own space and our own identity as a couple. And if she's unwilling or unable to do that work, if the past continues to dominate despite your expressed needs, you have to make a hard decision, because you deserve a partner who is present with you, not one who's still living in her past. You deserve a relationship that's about the two of you building something together, not about you managing the rubble of what came before. Red flag number 4. The emotional vampire. Red flag number 4 is one that can leave you feeling exhausted, depleted and emotionally drained without even understanding exactly why. This is what relationship experts call the emotional vampire. And when this pattern shows up in older women, it often comes with decades of refined techniques for extracting emotional energy while giving very little in return. Let's talk about what emotional vampirism actually means in a relationship context. An emotional vampire is someone who consistently takes far more emotional energy than they give. They require constant attention, validation, support, and caretaking. But when you need emotional support, when you're going through something difficult, when you need someone to be there for you, they're either absent or dismissive, or they somehow manage to make your problem about them. The challenge with recognizing this pattern is that emotional vampires are often very good at creating the appearance of emotional intimacy and connection. They share their feelings extensively. They talk about emotions constantly. They might even use therapy language and seem emotionally sophisticated. But here's the key distinction. True emotional intimacy is reciprocal. It flows both ways. Emotional vampirism only flows one way, from you to them, constantly draining your emotional reserves while never truly filling theirs because they have an endless void that can never be satisfied. Let me break down how this manifests specifically in relationships with older women who have this red flag. First, there's the crisis cycle. She always has a crisis, always. When you first started dating, maybe it was occasional. There was a problem at work, a health scare, an issue with her adult child. And of course, you showed up for her. You listened, you supported, you helped her navigate these challenges. That's what partners do. But then you start to notice a pattern. One crisis resolves, and almost immediately there's another one, and another one, and another one. The specifics change, but the dynamic doesn't. She's always in distress, always needs support, always requires your emotional labor to help her process, cope, or manage whatever the current emergency is. Here's where it gets insidious. These crises might be real. They might be legitimate problems. And that makes it very hard to identify the pattern as manipulation, because you feel like you'd be a terrible person to not show up for real problems. But the manipulation isn't in the reality of the problems. The manipulation is in the endless cycle that keeps you in the position of caretaker, always focused on her needs, always managing her emotions, never getting to a place of stability where there's space for mutuality and reciprocity. The older woman with this pattern might have adult children who provide endless sources of crisis, or health issues that are constantly flaring up, or work situations that are perpetually dramatic, or friend drama that never ends, or financial stresses that keep reoccurring. The specific content almost doesn't matter. What matters is that you find yourself always in emergency response mode, always supporting, always caregiving, always sacrificing your own needs and wants, because her crisis is always more urgent. The second manifestation of the emotional vampire is what I call the black hole effect. This is when no amount of support, validation, or reassurance is ever enough. You can give and give and give, and she's still unhappy, still insecure, still needing more. She requires constant reassurance about the relationship, about your feelings, about her attractiveness, and about her worth. And no matter how much you provide, it never fills the hole. The need is bottomless. You tell her you love her. 5 minutes later, she needs to hear it again. You compliment her. An hour later, she's fishing for more compliments. You spend quality time together. The next day, she's texting you about how she feels like you don't pay enough attention to her. You show up consistently. She still questions your commitment. What's happening here is that she's looking for external validation to fill an internal void. She doesn't have a secure sense of self-worth, so she needs constant input from you to feel okay about herself. But external validation can never actually fill that void. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it drains out just as fast. This pattern is exhausting. You find yourself constantly managing her emotional state, walking on eggshells, trying not to trigger her insecurity, spending enormous amounts of time and energy trying to make her feel loved, valued, and secure, but never succeeding because the problem isn't about what you're doing or not doing. The problem is internal to her, and she's making it your responsibility to fix. The third manifestation is the emotional hostage situation. This is when she uses emotional distress as a tool to control your behavior or keep you from setting boundaries. When you try to address a problem, she becomes so upset that you end up comforting her instead of resolving the issue. When you try to set a boundary, she has such a strong emotional reaction that you back down to avoid the fallout. When you try to spend time on your own needs, interests, or relationships, she becomes so distressed about feeling abandoned or neglected that you sacrifice what you need to manage her feelings. This might look like dramatic reactions to reasonable boundaries. You say you need a night to yourself to recharge, and she spirals into despair about feeling rejected. You mention wanting to maintain a friendship, and she becomes intensely anxious about being replaced. You bring up a legitimate concern about the relationship, and she becomes so distraught that the conversation becomes about calming her down rather than addressing your concern. Or it might look like threats of emotional harm. She doesn't necessarily directly threaten suicide or self-harm, though that's also a form of this manipulation. More commonly, it's more subtle. She talks about how she can't cope without you, how you're the only thing keeping her going, how if you ever left, she wouldn't know what she'd do. The message is clear. Her emotional well-being is your responsibility, and if you do anything she doesn't like, including setting healthy boundaries, you'll be responsible for her emotional crisis. This is one of the most pernicious forms of emotional manipulation because it preys on your compassion. You're a caring person. You don't want to cause distress. You want to be supportive, and she's weaponizing those good qualities against you to keep you trapped in a dynamic where her emotions always take precedence over your needs, boundaries, or well-being. The fourth manifestation of the emotional vampire is the one-way support street. When you need emotional support, she's nowhere to be found. Not necessarily physically absent, but emotionally unavailable. You're going through something difficult, and when you turn to her for support, you encounter one of several responses, none of them helpful. She might minimize your feelings. Oh, that's not such a big deal. You're being too sensitive. I've been through much worse. She might redirect the conversation back to herself. That reminds me of when I went through something similar but worse. And then she's off, talking about her experience while your need for support goes unmet. She might be physically present but emotionally detached. She's scrolling through her phone while you're talking. She's giving perfunctory responses without really engaging. She's clearly counting the minutes until she can change the subject, or she might actually become upset that you're upset. Your difficult emotions make her uncomfortable, so instead of supporting you, she makes you feel like you need to manage your emotions to protect hers. You end up comforting her about the fact that you're going through something hard, which is completely backwards. The contrast is stark. When she's in crisis, your job is to drop everything and be fully present. When you're in crisis, she's either absent, dismissive, or manages to make it about her. This is not a partnership. This is parasitism. Now here's why the emotional vampire pattern is particularly problematic with older women. They've had more time to perfect these techniques. They've had years, maybe decades of relationships where these patterns played out. They know what works to get the emotional supply they need. They're often more sophisticated in how they frame emotional manipulation, using language that sounds healthy or vulnerable, but actually serves to keep you trapped in a caregiving role. Additionally, there's often an assumption that older women are more emotionally mature and stable. So when you encounter this pattern, you might doubt your own perception. You might think, surely someone her age has it together. Maybe I'm not seeing this correctly. Maybe I'm not being supportive enough. This doubt keeps you trying harder, giving more, sacrificing more of yourself, while she continues to drain you dry. Here's how to recognize if you're with an emotional vampire. Ask yourself, is there reciprocity in emotional support, or is it always you supporting her? Do you feel emotionally exhausted after spending time together? Are your own emotional needs consistently sidelined or dismissed? Does she have crisis after crisis with no periods of stability? Is your reassurance and validation never enough, no matter how much you give? Do you find yourself managing her emotions at the expense of your own well-being? Have you lost touch with your own emotional needs because you're so focused on managing hers? If this sounds familiar, understand that you cannot fix this by giving more. You've already given too much. The solution requires her to do serious internal work, likely with a therapist, to develop her own emotional regulation skills and address whatever internal wounds are creating this bottomless need. What you can do is set boundaries. You can say, I want to support you, but I also need to take care of my own emotional well-being. I can't be your only source of emotional support. You need professional help for some of these issues. You can start making space for your own needs, take time for yourself, maintain friendships and interest outside the relationship. Stop dropping everything for every crisis and pay attention to what happens when you set these boundaries. A partner who genuinely cares about you will hear your limits and work to respect them, even if it's hard. An emotional vampire will escalate. She'll have bigger crises, more intense emotional reactions, more dramatic expressions of need. She'll try to make you feel guilty for having boundaries, and that escalation tells you everything you need to know. You deserve a partner who can stand on her own 2 feet emotionally, who can give support as well as receive it, who doesn't require you to sacrifice yourself to maintain her emotional equilibrium. Don't let anyone, regardless of age or circumstance, drain you dry while giving nothing back. That's not love. That's not partnership. That's exploitation dressed up in emotional language. Red flag number 5. The social isolator, red flag number 5, is particularly dangerous because by the time you recognize it, you might have already lost connections that took years to build. This is the social isolator pattern, and it's one of the key warning signs of a relationship that's moving from unhealthy to potentially abusive. The social isolator is someone who, systematically and often subtly, works to separate you from your support network, from your friends, your family, your colleagues, your hobbies, your independent activities, and your life outside of the relationship. The goal, whether conscious or unconscious, is to make you increasingly dependent on her, to reduce the number of people who might offer alternative perspectives on your relationship, and to create a situation where leaving becomes exponentially harder because you've lost your support system. Here's what makes this pattern so insidious. It rarely starts dramatically. In fact, in the beginning, she might seem very interested in your life, your friends, and your activities. She might want to be included, which seems like a good sign. She wants to meet your friends. She wants to come to your activities. She's interested in being part of your world, but slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things start to shift. And with older women who have this pattern, the manipulation is often more sophisticated because they've learned what works over years of relationships and have developed more subtle techniques. Let me walk you through the Various tactics of the social isolator. First, there's the criticism campaign. This is when she starts making critical comments about the people in your life. Your friends are immature. Your family doesn't respect you. Your colleague is a bad influence. Your workout buddy is trying to keep you away from her. The criticism might start small and casual, just an offhand comment here and there, but over time it builds. What's particularly manipulative is that she often frames these criticisms as concern for you. I just worry that your friend group is holding you back from growing up. I notice your family doesn't really value your opinions. I don't think your colleagues appreciate you the way they should. It sounds like she cares about you and wants what's best for you. But the consistent message is that the people in your life are negative influences who don't deserve your time, energy, or loyalty. Over time, these criticisms start to affect how you see your own relationships. You start to wonder if she's right. Are your friends really as immature as she says? Does your family actually respect you? You might start pulling back from these relationships, not because you want to, but because her constant criticism has planted seeds of doubt. The second tactic is the scheduling squeeze. This is when she increasingly monopolizes your time, leaving less and less space for other relationships and activities. She wants you to spend every evening together, every weekend. She plans things without checking if you have other commitments and then makes you feel guilty if you choose those commitments over her plans. It might start with reasonable-sounding requests. We don't spend enough quality time together. I miss you when you're not here. But reasonable requests become unreasonable demands. You can't have a weekly game night with friends without her making comments about choosing them over her. You can't visit your family without her either coming along and dominating the visit or making you feel guilty for going without her. She might create crises or important conversations that always seem to happen right when you have plans with other people. You're about to leave for a friend's birthday party, and suddenly she needs to have a serious talk right now. You're planning to spend Saturday with your family, and she's having a meltdown on Friday night that conveniently extends into Saturday. You're supposed to go to a hobby event, and she's suddenly feeling ill or anxious and needs you to stay. The pattern is clear. Anything that takes your time and attention away from her is treated as a threat. And over time, it becomes easier to just cancel plans, to skip events, and to pull back from other relationships because dealing with her reaction is more exhausting than giving up the other activities. The third tactic is the manufactured drama. When you do spend time with other people, she creates problems that punish you for having done so. You go out with friends, and when you come home, she's cold and distant. Or she picks a fight. Or she brings up relationship problems she suddenly thought of while you were gone. You visit your family, and she sends you texts throughout the visit that create stress and tension, pulling your attention back to her. You participate in an independent activity, and she has a crisis while you're there that requires you to leave early or feel guilty for staying. The message becomes clear. Spending time away from her has negative consequences. Your time with others is punished, and humans are wired to avoid punishment, so you start to avoid the situations that lead to it, which means avoiding time with anyone but her. The fourth tactic is the inclusion-exclusion game. This is more subtle. She doesn't directly say you can't see your friends or family. Instead, she insists on coming along to everything, but when she's there, she makes the experience unpleasant. She's cold or rude to your friends. She monopolizes conversations. She creates tension. She makes subtle digs. She seems bored and checked out. She has private conversations with you during group events, pulling you aside constantly. The effect is that your friends and family start to not enjoy having her around. And because she's always around, they start to not invite you as much. Or you start to decline invitations because bringing her makes everything awkward. But leaving her behind causes massive problems in your relationship. Either way, you're increasingly isolated. With older women, this tactic can be particularly effective because there's often already some social awkwardness around age differences. Your friends might already feel a bit weird about the age gap. She amplifies this discomfort with her behavior, making the divide bigger until you're choosing between your relationship and your friendships. The fifth tactic is dependency creation. As she's cutting you off from other support systems, she's simultaneously making you more dependent on her. Financially, she might be supporting you or influencing your career decisions in ways that reduce your independence. Emotionally, she positions herself as the only one who really understands you, who really cares, who's really there for you. Practically, she might move the relationship forward quickly, cohabiting or entangling your lives in ways that make it harder to maintain separate identities and support systems. The result of all these tactics is that over time, your world shrinks. You see your friends less, then rarely, then almost never. Family visits become sources of stress rather than joy. Independent hobbies and activities fall away. Your life becomes increasingly centered on her and your relationship. You become isolated. Why is this so dangerous? Because isolation makes you vulnerable. When you don't have outside perspectives, it's easier to normalize dysfunction. When you don't have people checking in on you, noticing changes in you, it's easier for problematic patterns to escalate. When you don't have a support system, leaving becomes infinitely harder because you feel like you have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Isolation is a key feature of controlling and abusive relationships because it removes the safety nets that would otherwise help you recognize problems and exit safely. With older women, the social isolator pattern can be particularly effective for several reasons. First, she may have more social skills and experience, so she's better at manipulating social situations and relationships. Second, age-related insecurity might actually fuel isolating behaviors. She might be genuinely worried about you leaving her for someone younger, so she cuts you off from potential alternatives. Third, societal ageism might make people less likely to call out her behavior. We're less likely to recognize an older woman as potentially controlling or abusive, so warning signs get missed. So how do you recognize if this is happening? Ask yourself these questions. Have your friendships declined significantly since starting this relationship? Do you see your family less than you used to? Have you given up hobbies or activities you used to enjoy? Does she react negatively when you spend time with anyone else? Does she frequently criticize the people in your life? Does she always need to be included in everything you do? Do you feel anxious or guilty when planning time away from her? Has she become your entire social world? If you're recognizing these patterns, it's time to take action. Reconnect with your support system. Reach out to friends and family you've lost touch with. Explain that you've been distant and want to reconnect. Be honest that your relationship has been consuming and you need to rebalance. They care about you. They'll likely be happy to hear from you. Reinvest in independent activities and relationships. Join a club, take a class, volunteer, have regular standing plans with friends that are non-negotiable. Rebuild the life that exists outside of your romantic relationship. And pay attention to her reaction. A healthy partner will support you having a full, balanced life. They'll encourage your friendships and independent growth. An isolator will escalate her controlling behavior when she feels you pulling away. Set clear boundaries. I will be spending time with my friends weekly, and this is non-negotiable in our relationship. I will maintain my relationship with my family, and your criticisms of them are not acceptable. I need independent activities and hobbies, and I expect you to respect that. If she can't respect these boundaries, if she continues to punish you for having a life outside the relationship, you're dealing with a serious red flag that suggests the relationship is not healthy and may be dangerous. No one who truly loves you wants to be your entire world. Healthy love encourages growth, connection, and independence, not isolation and dependency. If you're feeling trapped, cut off, or like your world has shrunk to just her, it's time to take that seriously and take action to reclaim your autonomy and your support network. Red flag number 6, the maturity paradox. Red flag number 6 is one that's particularly surprising because it goes against everything we assume about dating older women. We enter relationships with older women often expecting greater maturity, emotional intelligence, and stability. After all, they've lived longer, experienced more, and presumably done the work of personal growth that comes with age. But what happens when you discover that despite the years, despite the grey hair, despite the life experience, the emotional maturity simply isn't there? This is what I call the maturity paradox. The maturity paradox is when an older woman demonstrates patterns of emotional immaturity, poor impulse control, lack of self-awareness, or inability to take responsibility that you would expect from someone much younger and less experienced. Age hasn't brought wisdom, perspective, or growth. It's just brought more years of the same problematic patterns, now deeply ingrained and harder to change. This red flag is particularly confusing because it creates massive cognitive dissonance. You look at this woman who is older, who presents with confidence and life experience, who talks about all she's been through, and you assume the maturity is there. But then her behaviors tell a completely different story. Let me break down how the maturity paradox manifests. First, there's the emotional regulation failure. This is when she displays emotional reactions that are completely disproportionate to situations. She has tantrums, full-blown dramatic emotional explosions over minor issues. You forgot to call when you said you would, and she's screaming, crying, and accusing you of not caring about her. You have a different opinion about something small, and she's giving you the silent treatment for days. You can't attend an event she invited you to, and she's telling you the relationship is over. This isn't passionate emotion. This isn't someone who feels things deeply. This is someone who never learned to regulate their emotional responses. Who goes from 0 to 60 over tiny triggers, who cannot modulate their reactions to match the actual significance of what's happening. In a relationship, this creates an environment where you're constantly walking on eggshells. You can't predict what will set her off. Reasonable, normal things like having to work late, needing some alone time, or disagreeing about where to eat dinner become potential explosions. You find yourself managing every interaction carefully, trying to avoid triggers, which is exhausting and means you're never really relaxed or yourself in the relationship. The particularly frustrating thing about this pattern in older women is that they should have had decades to learn emotional regulation skills. Most people grow out of dramatic emotional volatility as they mature and learn better coping strategies. If she's 50, 60 or older and still can't manage her emotions better than a teenager, that's a massive red flag about her capacity for growth and change. Second, there's the accountability void. This is when she never takes responsibility for anything. Nothing is ever her fault. Every problem in the relationship is because of something you did. Every past relationship that failed was because the other person was terrible. Every job she lost was because of a terrible boss. Every friendship that ended was because the friend betrayed her. She is always the victim, always blameless, always being wronged by others. Mature people understand that we all contribute to our problems. They can look at failed relationships and see their own role, their own mistakes, and their own areas for growth. They can apologize genuinely when they've hurt someone. They can say, "I was wrong, I messed up, I need to do better." They take ownership of their choices and their impacts. When this maturity is absent, you're in a relationship with someone who cannot grow because they cannot see their own part in creating problems. And that means you're always going to be the bad guy. When there's conflict, you'll always end up apologizing, even when she's the one who behaved badly. You'll always be working to improve while she insists she's fine and you're the problem. Over time, this destroys your self-esteem. You start to believe maybe everything really is your fault. Maybe you are the problem. This is psychological manipulation. And it's especially damaging when it comes from someone whose age makes them seem more authoritative and trustworthy. Third, there's the impulse control problem. Mature people can delay gratification. They can think through consequences before acting. They can manage their impulses for the sake of long-term goals. But when the maturity paradox is present, she acts on impulse without considering consequences. This might show up as impulsive spending that creates financial instability. Making major decisions without discussion or thought. Saying things in anger that are deeply hurtful without thinking about the impact. Starting dramatic conflicts at inappropriate times, like right before important events. Engaging in behaviors that create immediate satisfaction, but long-term problems. You might see her burn bridges constantly. She quits jobs impulsively. She ends friendships over small slights. She makes big purchases she can't afford. She creates drama without thinking about consequences. And then she deals with the fallout, often expecting you to help clean up the mess before doing the same thing again. This pattern is exhausting to be around. It creates instability, You never know when she's going to do something impulsive that affects your life. You can't make plans because she might change her mind on a whim. You can't build stability because she's constantly making choices that undermine it. Fourth, there's the self-awareness deficit. She has no real insight into herself, her patterns, or her impact on others. She repeats the same mistakes over and over without learning from them. She doesn't understand why her relationships keep failing, why people keep leaving her, or why the same problems keep recurring. She lacks the capacity for genuine self-reflection. When you try to point out patterns or give feedback, she can't hear it. She becomes defensive, deflects, attacks you for bringing it up, or dismisses what you're saying entirely. There's no curiosity about herself, no willingness to look at her own behavior critically, no interest in growth or change. This is devastating for a relationship because growth requires self-awareness. Addressing problems requires being able to look at your own contribution. A relationship with someone who lacks self-awareness is a relationship that can never evolve or improve because one person can never see their role in problems clearly enough to change. Fifth, there's the conflict resolution incompetence. Mature people can navigate disagreements without destroying the relationship. They can argue about an issue without making it personal. They can take breaks when things get heated. They can come back to difficult conversations. They can compromise. They can repair after conflict. But when the maturity paradox is present, conflict is destructive. She fights dirty. She brings up past issues that were supposedly resolved. She makes personal attacks. She involves other people, sharing private relationship details with friends or family to get them on her side. She threatens to end the relationship every time there's a disagreement. She ghosts you, gives you the silent treatment, or punishes you emotionally for days after any conflict. Every disagreement becomes a huge ordeal. You start avoiding bringing up problems because the conflict process is so damaging. Issues don't get resolved. They get swept under the rug until they explode. The relationship stays stuck because you can't work through things in a healthy way. Now here's what makes the maturity paradox particularly painful. You chose to be with an older woman, likely because you were seeking some of the things that should come with age: maturity, stability, emotional wisdom, the ability to handle life's challenges with grace and perspective. When you discover these qualities aren't actually there despite the years she's lived, it's deeply disappointing and disorienting. You might find yourself making excuses for her. She's been through a lot. She has trauma. She's stressed. But here's the reality: everyone has been through things. Everyone has stress. True maturity is demonstrated not by the absence of challenges, but by how someone handles challenges. And if decades of life haven't taught her better coping strategies, better emotional regulation, and better relationship skills, they probably never will, at least not without serious intervention. So how do you recognize if you're dealing with the maturity paradox? Ask yourself, does she take responsibility for her role in problems, or is everyone else always to blame? Can she regulate her emotions proportionately to situations, or does she have dramatic overreactions? Does she make impulsive decisions without thinking through consequences? Does she have self-awareness and capacity for self-reflection, or is she completely blind to her own patterns? Can she handle conflict constructively, or does every disagreement become destructive? Have you noticed patterns of repeated mistakes without learning or growth? Do you feel like you're dating someone emotionally younger than you despite the age gap? If you're recognizing these patterns, you need to be realistic about what this means. Emotional maturity that hasn't developed by midlife or beyond is unlikely to suddenly appear. These patterns are deeply ingrained. Change is possible, but only if she recognizes there's a problem and does serious therapeutic work. If she lacks the self-awareness to even see the issues, change is virtually impossible. You have to decide if you're willing to be in a relationship with someone who has the life experience of decades, but the emotional maturity of someone much younger. Can you accept this reality, or will the cognitive dissonance and the disappointment of unmet expectations ultimately damage the relationship and your well-being? Red flag number 7. The future. Red flag number 7 is particularly cruel because it involves hope, dreams, and the future you're building together. Or at least the future you think you're building together. This is the future faker pattern. And when it appears in relationships with older women, it often comes with an added layer of urgency and pressure that makes it even more damaging. The future faker is someone who constantly talks about the future with you, makes plans and promises, and paints vivid pictures of what your life together will be like, but never actually follows through on any of it. The future they describe is always just around the corner, always coming, but somehow never actually arrives. It's a carrot dangled in front of you, keeping you invested, keeping you hopeful, and keeping you in the relationship. But it's a carrot you'll never actually reach. Let me explain why this pattern is especially prevalent and especially damaging in relationships with older women. First, there's often a sense of urgency that doesn't exist in relationships between younger people. When you're dating someone significantly older, there's an implicit clock ticking. She's in her 50s, 60s, or beyond. Time feels more pressing. There's a sense that if you're going to build a future together, you need to move relatively quickly. This urgency can be used as a tool to accelerate commitment and deepen your investment without the relationship actually progressing in meaningful ways. Here's how the future faker operates. The first tactic is the grand relationship vision. Early in the relationship, she paints an incredibly appealing picture of the future you'll have together. She talks about traveling the world together, building a life, maybe blending families, creating a home, pursuing dreams. The vision is specific enough to feel real and general enough to fit whatever you might want. She seems absolutely certain about this future. She's all in. She's found the one. You're going to have this amazing life together. This vision is intoxicating, especially if you've been through relationships that were ambiguous or uncertain. Having someone who seems so sure, so committed, and so clear about wanting a future with you feels amazing. You start to believe in this vision. You start to plan your life around it. You make decisions based on this future you're supposedly building together. But here's the catch. When it comes time to actually take concrete steps toward that future, she balks. The steps never happen. There are always reasons, always delays, always complications. She talks about you moving in together, but when you start actually planning it, there's always a reason why now isn't quite the right time. She needs to renovate first. Her lease isn't up yet. Her kids aren't ready. Her finances need to settle. There's always a legitimate sounding reason for delay, and because each reason sounds reasonable in isolation, you accept it. But when you look at the pattern, you realize the goalpost keeps moving. She talks about combining finances or making joint investments, but when it comes time to actually do it, she's suddenly much more cautious or backs out entirely. She talks about meeting each other's families and blending your lives, but somehow it never quite happens despite months or even years passing. She talks about long-term commitments, maybe marriage, but never actually moves toward making that happen despite bringing it up constantly. The second tactic is the conditional promise. Committed, and this is when promises about the future are always contingent on conditions that either never materialize or that put all the burden of change on you. Once I retire, we'll travel together. But retirement keeps getting pushed back. Once you get a better job, we'll buy a house together. But the goalpost for better keeps moving. Once my kids are more settled, we'll focus on our relationship. But the kids' issues never seem to resolve. Once I lose weight, we'll be more intimate. But the weight loss never happens. The conditions give her an out. She's made the promise, so you feel hopeful and committed. But the conditions mean she never has to actually fulfill the promise. And often, the conditions are either things she has control over but won't change, or things you have control over, putting you in the position of constantly trying to meet her standards to unlock the future she's promised. This keeps you in a perpetual state of trying to prove yourself worthy of the future she's dangled. You're always working toward the next condition, the next milestone that will finally bring you into the life she's described. But when you meet one condition, another appears. The future is always just one more hurdle away. The third tactic is the investment deepener. As time goes on and the promised future doesn't materialize, she uses your existing investment to keep you hooked. We've already put so much into this relationship. I know I said we'd be moved in together by now, but we've come so far. It would be a shame to give up now. Look at everything we've built. We can't throw that away. The promise of the future is renewed, and you're reminded of all you've already sacrificed and invested, creating a sunk cost fallacy that keeps you trying longer. This is particularly effective when combined with the urgency of age. You're aware that you've already spent 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years in this relationship. You're aware that she's getting older, and your opportunity to have the future she's described is theoretically shrinking. So you hold on, thinking surely the future will materialize soon because time is running out. But it never does. The fourth tactic is the blame shift. When you finally start pointing out that the promised future isn't happening, she makes it your fault. You're too impatient. You're putting pressure on her. You're not being supportive enough. You're creating problems. If you would just stop bringing it up, stop being so demanding, and stop being so focused on timelines, then the natural progression would happen. Your legitimate question about when promises will be fulfilled gets reframed as you being problematic. This makes you doubt yourself. Maybe you are being too pushy. Maybe you need to be more patient. Maybe you're sabotaging things by bringing it up. So you back off, stop asking questions, and stop holding her accountable. And more time passes with nothing changing. The fifth tactic is the partial follow-through. To keep you hooked, she occasionally takes a small step that seems like progress toward the future she's promised. She introduces you to one family member, but not the whole family. She lets you leave some things at her place, but you don't actually move in. She opens a joint account with a small amount of money, but keeps her major finances separate. She takes one trip with you, but all the world travel she promised doesn't materialize. These small steps feel like progress. They renew your hope.
See, it's happening.
We're moving forward. But when you zoom out and look at the big picture, you realize that years have passed and you're barely closer to the vision she sold you than you were at the beginning. The tiny steps are just enough to keep you invested, but not enough to actually build the future you were promised. Now, here's why the future faker pattern is especially damaging with older women. First, because of the age factor, time feels more precious and limited. Years spent in a relationship that's not actually progressing are years you can't get back, and they feel more significant when you're already in a relationship with someone older. Second, older women often have more practice with this pattern. If they've used it in past relationships, they know what works. They've refined the tactics. They can more convincingly sell the vision and more skillfully avoid follow-through. Third, because older women are presumed to be more mature and settled, we tend to trust that they mean what they say about the future. We assume they're past the games, past the uncertainties, and past the fear of commitment. So when they promise a future, we believe it more readily than we might believe the same promises from a younger person. This trust makes us more vulnerable to being strung along. The psychological damage of the future faker pattern is significant. You've organized your life around a future that's never going to happen. You've turned down opportunities, made sacrifices, and invested time and energy and emotion into building towards something that was always a mirage. When you finally realize this, the grief is profound. You grieve not just the relationship, but the future you thought you were building. You grieve the time you invested. You grieve the trust that was betrayed. So how do you recognize if you're with a future faker? Ask yourself these questions. Does she talk extensively about the future but never take concrete steps toward it? Are there always reasons why now isn't the right time for the next step in the relationship? Have years passed without meaningful progression toward the future she describes? Are promises always contingent on conditions that never quite materialize? When you bring up the lack of progress, does she make you feel like you're being impatient or problematic? Do you feel like you're constantly waiting for the real relationship to start? Have you reorganized your life around a future with her that keeps being delayed? If you're recognizing this pattern, it's time for a come-to-Jesus conversation. You need to stop accepting vague promises and start requiring concrete actions. Stop accepting reasons for delay without timelines for resolution. Say something like this: I need to know if we're actually building toward the future you describe, or if that's just something you say. I need to see concrete steps toward those goals within the next X months, or I need to reassess whether this relationship is actually going where I need it to go. A person who genuinely intends to build a future with you will hear this and either start taking real steps or will be honest with you that they can't give you what they've been promising. A future faker will get defensive, accuse you of being demanding, renew their promises while still not taking action, or give you more excuses and delays. If after clear communication about your needs, nothing changes, you have your answer. The future she's been describing was always a fantasy used to keep you invested, not a real plan she intended to execute. And as painful as it is to accept, you need to cut your losses and move on before you invest more of your precious, irreplaceable time in a relationship that's going nowhere. You deserve someone whose actions match their words. Someone who doesn't just talk about a future together, but actually builds it with you, step by step, decision by decision, day by day. Don't settle for promises that never materialize. Don't waste years waiting for a future that's never going to come. Your time is valuable. Your life is valuable. Spend it with someone who shows you through their actions, not just their words, that they're genuinely committed to building a real future with you. Red flag number 8. The superiority complex. The 8th and final red flag we need to discuss is one that can be particularly soul-crushing because it attacks your very sense of self-worth. This is the superiority complex, and when it manifests in older women, it often comes camouflaged as wisdom, life experience, or simply being more sophisticated and worldly. But underneath that camouflage is something much uglier, a fundamental belief that she is better than you and that you should be grateful to be with her. The superiority complex is more than just confidence. It's more than healthy self-esteem. It's a pattern where she consistently positions herself as superior to you in fundamental ways and treats you as lesser beneath her, or lucky to have her attention and affection. It's a dynamic where you're constantly made to feel that you don't quite measure up, that you're working to deserve her, and that you're the one who should be grateful this relationship exists, not her. Let me break down how this red flag shows up specifically in relationships with older women. First, there's the age-based superiority. This is when she uses the age difference itself as evidence of her superiority. She's older. Therefore, she's smarter, wiser, more experienced, and more valuable. You're younger. Therefore, you're less. This goes beyond the life experience weapon we discussed earlier. This is about a fundamental belief that age equals worth, and she has more worth than you because she has more years. This manifests in various ways. She might make comments about you still having a lot to learn or being young and naive. She might talk down to you as if you're a child who needs guidance rather than a partner who deserves respect. She might make decisions for you without consultation because she knows better due to her age. She might dismiss your successes or accomplishments as cute or impressive for someone your age, with the implication being that they're not actually that impressive in absolute terms. The message is clear. I am the prize here. I am the one bringing value to this relationship. You should feel lucky that someone like me, with my experience and maturity, is giving you attention. This creates a dynamic where you're constantly trying to prove yourself worthy, constantly seeking her approval, and constantly feeling like you're not enough. Second, there's the social status superiority. This is when she positions herself as socially superior to you and makes sure you know it. Maybe she has more money, and she constantly reminds you of the lifestyle she provides or the experiences she exposes you to. Maybe she has a more prestigious career, and she makes subtle or not so subtle comments about your lower status job. Maybe she moves in more elite social circles, and she points out how you don't quite fit in or don't have the sophistication to navigate her world. She might introduce you to her friends or family in ways that subtly put you down. This is John. He's a retail manager, said with just enough tone to make it clear that the retail manager is not quite impressive enough for her circle. She might make comments about your clothes, your car, your home, or your manners, always with the implication that they're not quite up to her standards. She might correct you in social situations, embarrassing you in front of others to demonstrate that she knows better, she's more cultured, and she's more refined. The effect is that you feel like you're constantly failing some test you didn't know you were taking. You become self-conscious about everything. You start to believe that you really are lesser, really don't measure up, and really are lucky to have someone of her caliber interested in you. Third, There's the intellectual superiority. She positions herself as smarter than you and makes sure you know it. She might correct you constantly. You make a statement and she jumps in to correct a minor detail, to add information you left out or to point out what you got wrong. You share an idea and she explains why it won't work or why her idea is better. You express an opinion and she tells you why you're wrong or why your thinking is flawed. This isn't healthy intellectual discourse between partners who enjoy debate and discussion. This is someone who needs to be the smartest person in the room and needs you to acknowledge that she's smarter than you. She might use vocabulary you don't know and then make a point of your not knowing it. She might reference books, theories, or concepts and make you feel stupid for not being familiar with them. She might explain things to you that you already understand, talking down to you as if you're incapable of grasping complex ideas without her help. Over time, this destroys your confidence in your own intelligence and judgment. You start to second-guess yourself. You start to believe that you're not as smart as you thought. You start to defer to her on everything because she's made it clear that her thinking is superior to yours. Fourth, there's the emotional superiority. She positions herself as more emotionally evolved than you. She's done the work. She's been to therapy. She knows herself. She's enlightened. And you, by comparison, are emotionally immature, unaware, or damaged. She analyzes you, diagnoses your issues, and tells you what your problems are and why you feel the way you feel. She doesn't listen to understand your emotional experience. She listens to find flaws in your emotional processing so she can correct you and demonstrate her superior emotional intelligence. When you have feelings she doesn't like or that are inconvenient to her, she doesn't validate them. She explains why they're irrational or why you're misinterpreting the situation. Your sadness is you being too sensitive. Your anger is you not managing your emotions properly. Your anxiety is you not having done enough personal growth work. The message is that your emotions are wrong. Her assessment of you is right. And if you were as emotionally mature as she is, you wouldn't feel the way you feel. This is incredibly invalidating and crazy-making. You lose trust in your own emotional experience. You start to believe that what you feel isn't real or isn't valid unless she agrees that it's an appropriate response. You become dependent on her to tell you what you should feel and how you should interpret your own experience. Fifth, there's the gratitude demand. She constantly reminds you, subtly or overtly, that you should be grateful to be with her. She points out other people who wanted her. She talks about what she could have or who she could be with the implication being that she chose you and you should appreciate that choice. She mentions the things she's sacrificed or compromised on to be with you. She makes it clear that she could do better, but she's graciously accepting you despite your shortcomings. When you don't show sufficient gratitude, or when you dare to be unhappy about something in the relationship, she's shocked and offended. How can you be unhappy? How can you want more? Don't you know how good you have it? Don't you know how lucky you are? Other people would kill to be in your position. The implication is always that you're the lucky one, not her. You're getting more than you deserve, not her. You should be on your best behavior trying to keep her, not her trying to keep you. This creates a fundamentally unequal power dynamic. In healthy relationships, both people feel lucky to have found each other. Both people feel like they've won the lottery. Both people wake up grateful that this person chose them. But when one person has a superiority complex, only one person gets to feel like the prize, and it's never going to be you. Now, here's why the superiority complex is particularly problematic with older women. Society already sends messages about age and value, particularly for women. There's cultural baggage around age gaps, with assumptions about what each person is getting from the relationship. An older woman with a superiority complex can exploit these cultural narratives. She might play into assumptions that she's with someone younger because they're more attractive or more virile, positioning your youth and attractiveness as the only thing you bring to the relationship. Or she might flip the script and position your willingness to be with an older woman as evidence that you couldn't do better with women your own age. Either way, she's using the age dynamic to maintain a power imbalance where she's superior and you're inferior. And because age-based hierarchy is somewhat normalized in our culture, it can be harder to recognize that what's happening is actually Emotional abuse disguised as age-appropriate. Dynamics, the psychological damage of being in a relationship with someone who has a superiority complex is severe. Your self-esteem erodes. You start to believe the messages about your inadequacy. You develop anxiety about measuring up. You become hypervigilant about mistakes or flaws because you know they'll be used as evidence of your lesser status. You lose confidence in yourself, your abilities, and your value as a person. And ironically, as your confidence deteriorates, it becomes harder to leave because you believe the lie that you couldn't do better, that no one else would want you, and that you should be grateful for whatever crumbs of affection she throws your way. So how do you recognize if you're dealing with the superiority complex? Ask yourself, does she consistently position herself as better than you in fundamental ways? Do you feel like you're lucky to be with her while she's settling for you? Does she constantly correct, criticize, or talk down to you? Do you feel like you're always trying to prove yourself worthy of her? Has your self-esteem and self-confidence decreased significantly since being in this relationship? Does she use your age, social status, intelligence, or emotional state as evidence of your inferiority? Do you feel like a student or subordinate rather than an equal partner? If this sounds familiar, you need to understand something crucial. This is emotional abuse. Someone who truly values and respects you doesn't need to put you down to feel good about themselves. Someone who truly sees you as a partner doesn't position themselves as superior. Someone who truly loves you builds you up, doesn't tear you down. You don't need to prove yourself worthy. You already are worthy. You deserve a partner who sees your worth, who treats you as an equal, and who makes you feel more confident and capable, not less. The fact that she's older doesn't make her more valuable as a human being. Life experience is valuable, yes, but so are the fresh perspective, energy, and different life experiences you bring. A relationship should be a partnership of equals who bring different but equally valuable things to the table. If you're in a relationship with someone who has a superiority complex, you have limited options. You can try to address it directly. Point out specific instances where you felt talked down to or treated as inferior. Explain that you need to be treated as an equal partner or the relationship won't work. But be prepared for defensiveness, denial, or even escalation of the superior positioning. More likely, this pattern is so deeply ingrained that she won't be able to change it. She genuinely believes she's superior to you, and that belief structure is part of her core identity. You'll probably need to leave, and when you do, don't be surprised if she tells you that you're making a mistake, that you'll never find anyone better, that you're throwing away the best thing that ever happened to you. That's the superiority complex talking one last time. Don't listen, you deserve better. You deserve a love that's built on mutual respect, mutual admiration, and mutual appreciation. You deserve someone who makes you feel more yourself, not less. Someone who builds you up, not tears you down. Someone who treats you as a partner, not as a subordinate or a lucky charity case. Don't settle for anything less. We've covered a lot of ground today. 8 major red flags that can show up in relationships with older women. Each one serious, each one capable of causing significant harm to your well-being, your future, and your sense of self. Before we wrap up, I want to put all of this in perspective and leave you with some final thoughts. First, I want to reiterate something crucial. This video is not about saying that all older women are problematic or that age gap relationships are inherently bad. They're not. Many people have incredibly fulfilling, healthy, wonderful relationships with partners who are significantly older. Age gaps aren't the problem. Problematic behavior is the problem, and that behavior can show up regardless of anyone's age. The reason we focus specifically on older women in this video is because when these red flags appear in that context, they often have specific manifestations and specific tactics that are worth understanding. The life experience weapon only works when there's an age gap. The maturity paradox is specifically about expecting certain qualities that should come with age and not finding them. The superiority complex in age gap relationships has specific dynamics that are different from superiority complexes in same-age relationships, but the core message transcends age. Pay attention to how someone treats you. Pay attention to patterns. Pay attention to how you feel in the relationship. Pay attention to whether the relationship is adding to your life or draining from it. These principles apply to any relationship with any person of any age. Second, I want to talk about something important: the difference between red flags and deal breakers. and the difference between patterns and isolated incidents. An isolated incident of bad behavior, especially if it's acknowledged, apologized for, and changed, is not necessarily a red flag. We're all human. We all have bad days. We all make mistakes. What makes something a red flag is that it's a pattern. It happens repeatedly. It doesn't change even when addressed. It's a consistent feature of the relationship, not an aberration. Similarly, red flags aren't automatically deal breakers. Some of these patterns can be addressed and changed if the person is willing to do the work, usually with professional help. But they do require serious attention. They require honest conversations. They require a willingness from your partner to acknowledge the problem and commit to change. And they require you to set clear boundaries about what you will and won't accept. What makes red flags become deal breakers is when they're pointed out and nothing changes. When you clearly communicate your needs and boundaries and they're consistently violated. When promises to change are made but never followed through on. When the person refuses to acknowledge that there's even a problem. That's when you have to accept that this is who they are and this is who they're going to stay. And you have to decide if you can accept a relationship with this person as they actually are, not as you hope they might become. Third, let's talk about intuition. Throughout this video, I've been giving you concrete signs to look for and specific patterns to recognize. But there's something else that's equally important: your gut instinct. Often we know something is wrong long before we can articulate what it is. We feel uncomfortable, uneasy, anxious, or stressed in the relationship, but we can't quite put our finger on why. We rationalize these feelings away. We tell ourselves we're being too sensitive, too demanding, too paranoid. Don't do that. Your intuition is real data. Your emotional response to patterns is information. If something feels off, even if you can't explain exactly why, that feeling deserves respect and investigation. Don't let anyone, including a partner wielding the life experience weapon, make you doubt your own instincts about your own relationship. Fourth, I want to address something that might be happening for some of you watching this. You might have recognized multiple red flags in your current relationship. You might be feeling scared, overwhelmed, or trapped. You might be wondering how you got here, how you missed these signs, and how you allowed this to happen. I want you to hear this. It's not your fault. These patterns are manipulative by design. They often start subtly and escalate gradually. People displaying these red flags are often skilled at manipulation, sometimes after years of practice. You're not stupid for not seeing it sooner. You're not weak for being affected by it. You're not to blame for being manipulated by someone who was skilled at manipulation. What matters now is what you do going forward. Now that you can see the patterns, now that you understand what's happening, you have choices. It won't be easy. Leaving a relationship, especially one you've invested significant time and emotion in, especially one where you've been systematically manipulated to believe you need this person, is incredibly hard. But hard doesn't mean impossible. And staying in a relationship that's damaging you is also hard, just in different ways. You get to choose your hard. Choose the hard that leads to freedom and healing, not the hard that leads to more of the same. Fifth, if you're recognizing these patterns, please consider seeking support. Talk to friends and family you trust. If you've been isolated, reach out to people you've lost touch with. Consider working with a therapist, particularly one who specializes in relationship issues or emotional abuse. You don't have to navigate this alone. In fact, it's much harder and much more dangerous to try to do it alone. Part of what makes these red flag patterns so damaging is that they're designed to isolate you and make you feel like you have no one else. Prove that wrong. Build your support network. Let people who care about you help you. Sixth, I want to talk to those of you who might be watching this, not because you're in a problematic relationship with an older woman, but because you're an older woman wondering if you display any of these patterns. First, thank you for being willing to look at yourself honestly. That takes courage. If you recognize yourself in any of these red flags, I want you to know that recognition is the first step toward change. You're not a monster. You're a person with patterns that are hurting people you care about. Patterns can be changed with awareness and work. Consider working with a therapist to understand where these patterns come from and how to develop healthier ways of relating. Consider reading books about healthy relationships, attachment styles, emotional regulation, and communication. Consider having honest conversations with people you've been in relationships with about their experience of you. It will be uncomfortable, but growth always is. The fact that you're willing to look at yourself and consider whether you might be the problem is actually a sign that you're capable of more awareness and health than people who display these red flags without any insight. Use that awareness. Do the work. Become the partner you're capable of being. Seventh, for those of you who are not currently in relationships but are watching this as preparation for future relationships, you're doing something incredibly smart. Understanding red flags before you're emotionally invested makes it much easier to recognize them early and make good decisions. Take what you've learned here and use it not to become cynical or closed off to love, but to become discerning. There's a huge difference. Being discerning means having standards, knowing what healthy looks like, being willing to walk away from situations that aren't good for you, and not settling for less than you deserve. Don't enter relationships looking for red flags everywhere, making every small mistake into evidence of dysfunction. That's not healthy either. But do pay attention, notice patterns, trust your gut. And when you see consistent evidence that someone's character, behavior, or treatment of you is problematic, believe what you're seeing and act accordingly. The best time to leave a bad relationship is early, before you're too entangled, before you've invested too much, before the manipulation has worn down your confidence and judgment. Eighth, let's talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough: the stigma around men being in problematic relationships with women. We have cultural scripts about men being strong, being in control, and not being vulnerable to manipulation. These scripts are garbage. They hurt men by making it harder to acknowledge when you're in a situation that's not okay, harder to ask for help, and harder to leave because you don't want to look weak or admit that a woman had power over you. Please hear this. Being manipulated by someone skilled at manipulation doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Being hurt in a relationship doesn't make you less of a man. It makes you someone who cared and who got hurt, which is a universal human experience. Asking for help doesn't make you pathetic. It makes you smart. Strong people ask for help when they need it. Only foolish people suffer alone, trying to prove something that doesn't need proving. If you're a man watching this and recognizing that you're in a problematic relationship, don't let toxic masculinity keep you trapped. Don't let fear of judgment keep you silent. Talk to people. Get support. Do what you need to do to protect yourself and get out. Your well-being matters just as much as anyone else's. Ninth, I want to address healing. If you've been in a relationship with someone displaying these red flags, especially if you've been in such a relationship for a long time, getting out is only the first step. You'll also need to heal. These experiences leave marks. They affect how you see yourself, how you trust others, and how you approach future relationships. They can leave you with anxiety, depression, trust issues, and damaged self-esteem. This isn't something to just push through or ignore. You deserve time and space and support to heal. Therapy is incredibly valuable. Working with someone trained to help people recover from unhealthy relationship dynamics can make a huge difference. Beyond therapy, give yourself time. Don't rush into another relationship trying to fill the void or prove to yourself that you can find better. Take time to reconnect with yourself. Rediscover who you are outside of that relationship. Rebuild relationships with friends and family. Engage in activities that bring you joy and help you feel like yourself. The healing process is different for everyone, but it's necessary. Don't skip it. 10th, and finally, I want to leave you with hope. If you've recognized yourself or your relationship in this video, I know that's painful. I know it might feel overwhelming. But knowledge is power. Understanding what's happening is the first step toward changing it, and change is possible. Maybe change within the relationship if your partner is willing to do the work. Maybe change through leaving the relationship and building a different life. Either way, you're not stuck. You're not trapped. You have agency and choice and the possibility of a different future. There are healthy, wonderful, fulfilling relationships out there. There are people who will treat you with respect and kindness and genuine love. There are partnerships that build both people up, that create joy and stability and growth. You can have that. Maybe not with the person you're with now if they have these red flags and won't address them, but with someone. You deserve that kind of love. Don't settle for less because you've been convinced you can't do better, or because you're afraid of being alone, or because you've already invested so much time. Your future is unwritten. You get to decide what happens next. You get to decide what you will accept and what you won't. You get to decide to choose yourself, your well-being, your future, and your happiness. That's not selfish, that's healthy, that's necessary, that's what people who love themselves do. And you deserve to love yourself enough to demand better. All right, everyone, we've reached the end of this video. I hope this has been valuable for you. I hope it's given you tools to recognize unhealthy patterns, whether in your current relationship or in evaluating future relationships. Most of all, I hope it's reminded you that you deserve to be treated well, that you deserve real love built on mutual respect, and that you have the power to make choices that protect your well-being. Before you go, I want to ask you again to support this channel. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. It really does make a difference in helping this content reach more people who need to see it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and make sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos where we dive deep into relationship dynamics, personal growth, and navigating the complexities of modern dating and relationships. Leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. Tell me if you recognized any of these red flags. Share your experiences if you're comfortable doing so. The comment section is a community where we can all learn from each other's experiences and support each other through these challenges. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to recognize their own situation or find the courage to make a change. Share this video. If you know someone who might be in a relationship with these red flags, share it with them. Sometimes we can't see clearly what's happening in our own relationships, but when someone we care about shares information like this, it can open our eyes. You might genuinely help someone recognize a situation they couldn't see on their own. And finally, if you really want to support this channel and help us keep creating content like this, consider leaving a super thanks. Your financial support allows us to dedicate time to researching, scripting, and producing videos that go deep into topics that matter. It allows us to be thorough and comprehensive rather than superficial. It helps us build a channel that's focused on genuinely helping people rather than just chasing clicks. Every contribution makes a real difference, and I'm deeply grateful to everyone who supports the channel in this way. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for trusting me with your time. Thank you for being willing to look at these difficult topics. Thank you for caring enough about yourself and your relationships to educate yourself about healthy versus unhealthy dynamics. That willingness to learn and grow is what will ultimately lead you to the relationship you deserve. Remember, you are worthy of love that builds you up, not tears you down. You are worthy of a partner who treats you as an equal. You are worthy of a relationship that adds to your life rather than draining from it. Don't settle for less. You deserve better, and better is out there waiting for you. Take care of yourselves. Until next time, stay strong, stay aware, and most importantly, stay true to yourself and what you know you deserve.